are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me today, it's, a good friend of the show. You know him. You love him. It's Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
Doing as well as I can be for still being here and still waiting for something. At least there might be, something on the horizon. We're praying for it at this point.
We
desperately need it.
We're getting there. We're getting close. We're all getting stir crazy. We've all been home for a very long time. And we have been attempting to alleviate that boredom by running our polls over on our Twitter at YWT Podcast. You can find the show there. You can also find the show on Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Sports Talk Philly. We're pretty much all over the place. Everywhere you can find Joe Rogan, you can find us. Till he goes to just Spotify, then you can find us other places too.
Yeah.
But we're not going to bury the lead here. We're just going to jump right into it. The biggest story we are recording Saturday morning. As of late last night, the NHLPA Executive Board, I believe it is, has approved further negotiations with the NHL regarding a return-to-play schedule and a playoff format. And for the first time, we kind of have a picture of what that playoff format could look like. Kevin, I'm sure you've gotten a chance to take a look at it. Overall thoughts, what do you think overall about 24 teams making the playoffs and kind of the format of how it looks like it's going to play out?
Well, all right. So first thought is kind of like a lot of people. You hate the idea of 24 teams being in the playoffs.
Yeah.
It's important to kind of realize what their goal is here and what the end goal is. First of all, the goal is obviously to play. That's the first thing.
Absolutely.
So if the goal is to play, then you'll do whatever it takes to get it back. And it's going to be really hard to leave certain teams out of the picture that were close and could have made the playoffs.
Montreal is one of the big ones.
Is it a little extreme to go that far back? Possibly. But at the same time, from a revenue standpoint, the money that's out there for broadcasts, hitting those two major markets in Chicago and Montreal make a lot of sense. That's not
an accident.
Right. There's a lot at stake, and I think that's why you draw the line and you go, okay, where do we draw the line? Buffalo.
The fact that you get almost every Canadian team in, if you expand this.
Realistically, yeah. I mean, you draw the line at Buffalo, Anaheim, LA, Ottawa. Like, that's who's left out of it. And those teams, I think, we're all kind of on the bandwagon of, we're checked out for the year.
We're going to be bad, and we know it.
And
for sure,
we're fine getting it. So, I mean, think about what Drew Doughty said about coming back and going, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Well, of course not, because you had 10 games left and you were done for the year.
He also said that the winner of the Stanley Cup isn't a real Stanley Cup winner, but it's easy for him to say when they're 39,000 points out of the playoffs.
True. And see, here's the thing. I think it possibly even makes it more legitimate because
you
the parity it's a league of parity.
You beat more teams.
Now you're at
and every team had 2 months to get healthy.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that people are talking about a little bit, but I don't think it's a big enough story.
Sure.
You hear every season about the rash of injuries that comes out. The big one was a couple of years ago when Wayne Simmons was playing the whole year with just torn up. His whole body was torn up. Going into that playoff series that he was brutalized for, imagine he had 8 weeks to sit on his couch and heal and ice up and rest and physical therapy and stay in shape, of course, because they're all staying in shape. But you're not taking hits. You're not taking that wear on your body. And everything you're doing yourself. So you're not getting hit the way you're getting hit playing games. These playoffs are going to be 24 almost perfectly healthy teams.
Exactly.
And they're all driven because none of them have played for 2 months. They're going to come out full of piss and vinegar and just boom, 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Well, that's why I kind of laughed when they turned around and in a matter of about an hour, as I was following everything on Friday night, waiting for the result to come out, it went from, it narrowly passed to 29-2. And I would be willing to
numbers. A whole bunch of teams went, yeah, all right.
Well, and I would be willing to lay a wager, and I'm not a betting type person, but I'd be willing to make a significant wager that the two teams that said no, either
Boston
could have been at the very top or the very bottom.
Boston said no.
Or it's Boston and New Jersey who are 3 points out with a couple games in hand and go, where was our chance? We could have been in 24th. Where's our chance? And that's the only thing I can think of. The 5 below them are saying, we're good with just going home.
home.
20 at the top are going, give us playoffs. Because, see, that's the thing. Boston and Tampa Bay could say, I don't like this format, but also are you saying no to I don't like the format or no to I don't want to play? At some point in time, you either want to play or you don't.
Well, and
So
let's
make up your
break
mind.
down let's break down what the formula or what the bracket actually looks like for people that might not have seen it.
Sure. I'll start. Let me start by saying this for you right
Yeah.
here. This is the part that's negotiable.
Yes,
There
this
are
is not set
people
in
who
stone.
the NHL wants a playoff bracket, and that's where this structure came from that people have been seeing for a few days, possibly at this point. And the Players Association wants to do reseeding of some form potentially. And granted, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. First of all, since we know most of our listening audience, hopefully we're reaching some other NHL fans out there, but most of them are Flyer fans.
Oh,
and
we'll
we
get
know
into the
this.
poll results later.
Yes.
Don't you worry.
But we know that most of them are Flyers fans. I'd say 90% easily, obviously.
About 98% by our poll.
Based on the polls. I got you. But nonetheless, if you're a Flyers fan and you see the structure, you should be
very
thrilled.
happy. Yep.
And I'll tell you why. First of all, you're in the top four.
Well,
the top four is getting an instant.
Let's break down what this format is, right?
Sure.
Because we haven't actually explained that yet.
Yeah. So the top four in each conference are supposed to be getting buys for what they're calling the opening round.
The quote-unquote first round, the play-in games,
it's
the wild card.
I don't even want to call it the
first
round because I think they are still trying to label the first round of the playoffs as the first round of the playoffs,
right.
1 through 16 playing.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to do.
The graphic I'm looking at has 8 teams in each conference in the play-in round. And again,
Correct.
This is all negotiable. This hasn't been secured. But
right.
I get the impression that it's going to look something very close to this.
I would agree with that.
As it sits right now. Everything we've heard trends towards it looking something like that.
And I think a lot of what they're going to sit there and tell you the negotiation part of it is not necessarily the format or the structure of the format, but the other fine details. It's going to come down to player safety and testing. There's a lot of things.
Testing.
There was a lot of things. I'm trying to go back and make sure I can find the article I wrote Friday night on it because it said testing, player safety, players having to leave their families, pay, and belief it should have been a full player vote and not just the executive board, which is every player rep.
And I believe it's going to that now, correct?
Well,
it has moved beyond the executive board, and
I don't know if that's the full case. The league has to go through a process of their own, just like the Players Association did. So that's what I think it more or less means. I don't think any player would vote without kind of getting some input.
Of course.
Let's put it this way. Let's not sugarcoat this and say the players just had this thrown in front of them 2 days ago. They knew it was coming. They had an idea of what the format was, and you hopefully talked.
But either way, these first 8 teams in each conference plays in the play-in round. And the rumor I'm hearing is best of 5, although, again, none of this has been
exactly
confirmed.
What it is, to my knowledge. It's going to be a best of 5 series between teams 5 through 12 in the conference.
Right.
Exactly.
And right now, in the East, real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking for, in the play-in round, you'd have Toronto and Columbus, Pittsburgh and Montreal, the Islanders and the Panthers, and the Carolina Hurricanes and the New York Rangers. And that would be the play-in round. So then while all those teams are playing a best 3 of 5, what are the top 4 teams doing? Because if the top 4 teams aren't playing, well, aren't the teams who are playing have an advantage because they get back in game shape and they get their legs under them? So what the NHL has proposed, and again, this is also up for debate, is that the top 4 teams in the East, it's Boston, Tampa, Washington, and Philadelphia. And it's very important. We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Those teams will play for seeding. So they'll play a round robin. So in our example, the Flyers will play the Washington Capitals, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Boston Bruins. Some mix of quote-unquote home games and away games, but it's all going to be neutral site, so it doesn't matter.
Correct.
And then those games will be determined almost in like an Olympic grouping fashion, and you'll get seeded. And then the top seed will play the winner of Toronto and Columbus. The second seed will play the winner of the Islanders and the Panthers. The third seed will face the winner of the Hurricanes and the Rangers. And the fourth seed will face the winner of the Penguins and Canadians. And again, that's all just proposed.
Yes. So to go further detail into it, because first of all, I did want to define. So Pittsburgh's going to be the 5, Montreal will be the 12, and then so on. So go down the list as you did, and so I believe Toronto is the next one in line as another divisional or top 3 divisional team. So they would be 6. Florida's the 11.
Oh, are they going to do it like that?
Yes.
Okay, I thought they were just going to straight seed down the conference. Okay.
No, the seeding is going to go by points percentage. So if you can go and look – so actually that creates a weird dynamic in the Western Conference because your top 4 – technically if you thought they were doing it the way that it looks in the East, like in the East it actually lines up perfectly. Boston and Tampa Bay are the top 2 in one division. Washington, Philadelphia are the top two in the other division. All right, that makes a lot of sense. That's your top four, right? In the Western Conference, though, St. Louis and Colorado are the top two in one division, and Vegas and Edmonton are the top two in the other. But doing it by points percentage, Dallas has played 2 fewer games than Edmonton and has 1 fewer point. You do the math on that without having to do real math, obviously, because it's laid out in front of us. Dallas actually becomes the 4 seed, and Edmonton becomes the 5. So it's a bit of an interesting structure. And then think about that think about that from Edmonton's perspective. You're second in your division. You were 3 points out of division lead, and you're going to play in this play-in round. Look, the play-in round should scare everybody.
Yep.
Nobody wants to be the team that gets told, we're going to return to play, and you get no buffer period. You're just going to play for your life in a 5-game series.
Yep.
You
might play 3 games, get swept, and go home. And so that is the reason why the Philadelphia Flyers passing the Pittsburgh Penguins late in the season as we saw it.
Yep.
Passing them, retaining that second spot in the Metro, getting one of these top 4 seeds is absolutely critical, because no matter what, worst case scenario, the Flyers go 0-3. They still get to play hockey.
Okay, and here's the thing that makes it even better. You're the 4 seed, right? So let's say you're the 4 seed.
The only way you can go up.
Correct. You have nothing to lose and everything in the game. You could have the worst 3 games possible because the rust factor is in there because you haven't played in 2.5 months, 3 months.
It doesn't matter.
And it won't matter. You're going to be the 4 seed and you're going to play the winner of Pittsburgh, Montreal, no matter what.
But if you come
back, have a great 3 weeks of camp, as they're saying it's going to be, and play 3 games very well and beat Washington, Tampa Bay, and Boston, you could – well, I don't know that they're going to move somebody like that all the way up to 1, but let's say you're a 2.
Oh, it is going to be
you're playing – right. But let's say you're a 2, and now all of a sudden you're playing either 7 or 10.
Yeah.
You know?
I would also like to see – and again, we've heard rumors about this and nothing's up for grabs. I would love to see a reseed coming out of the play-in round. And I don't think it's going to happen. But if you're mixing around the top 4 seeds, why not mix the bottom 4? It's not like you have travel to worry about. Everyone's going to be in a hub city. The only thing it changes is what time slot you play your game in and who you play.
Yeah, quite possibly. Well, and if they do it tournament style, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the teams that are higher seeded they're either going to get the prime time slots automatically, or they get the pick of it. Like when Canada's hosting the World Juniors and they get to the semifinals and the U.S. is also in the semifinals and they're not playing each other, Canada gets that primetime slot.
Right.
Just because of where they are and who they are and usually their ranking. Let's not sugarcoat that either. They're usually one of the top 2 there anyway. And the U.S. is playing – so the U.S. is playing at 9 a.m. and Canada's playing at 1 p.m. because Canada gets that better time slot when people are actually more likely to be up to see it than the U.S. side. I think that's how it's possibly going to go because let's this way. There is a way to do this with 2 cities.
Yeah.
There's a way to do an 18 playoff
definitely
by conference with 2 cities and literally stagger them by day and say we're playing 2 games every day.
You can play more than that. The NBA came out today and said that when their season picks back up, they're going to be running games all day. Games are going to start at noon and run until like 10 or 11 o'clock.
I think you're going to see that at the beginning. Like you have
to get games down.
You're going to have 12 teams that need to share the arena, and there's no other way around it. You're going to need 4 games a day.
You're going to need
once you get to 8, let's not act. Well, let's not act like they're not going to say the players need that gap between games like they usually get anyway.
To get tested
you're not going to keep handing them back to backs. It makes testing. It makes testing a lot easier. It makes recovery a lot easier. You don't put the players' overall health at risk. Not just
you don't want the players. And the players have been sitting on their couch for 2 months. And even with a 3 to 5 game warm up, you're still going to have some issues.
Let's put it this way. Call it a minor miracle for the Flyers that Ivan Provorov's at a place where he's got a rink that he can skate on.
Very careful.
Supposedly, Robert Haig is able to skate wherever he is. I think they think he's in Sweden.
Did he go home?
So,
okay.
Yeah, so if he's in Sweden, there might be a rink he has access to or some form of ice. Let's just call it that.
There might just be ice, right?
And call it a minor miracle that Claude Giroux gets into the only open rink in Ottawa. Yep. On the only day it's open because the next day they shut it down again. So he got on the ice for a day, but still got on the ice.
More than anybody else in the NHL, really.
Exactly. It's still an exclusive training period.
I think there were 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 NHLers.
It was 3 or 4. It was 3 or 4 per session that they had, and I don't know how many sessions they had on that one day.
But there were also non-NHLers in there too. There
Correct.
weren't a ton of NHLers
there were
in there.
12-year-olds who were skating.
Yep. There weren't a ton of NHLers in there, and the fact that Claude Giroux was one of maybe a dozen or so, that's, that could be a difference if they pick up in 2 weeks.
Right. I mean, but it even just shows, I don't know how many NHLers took the ice that day, and I don't know how many are based in Ottawa right now that are sitting there going, that rink was within close enough distance that they could go. But obviously, Claude Giroux takes one look at open ice and
is there.
No, and the standings position and the format and goes, I'm jumping into this thing. Now, do you think James Van Riemsdyk is the Flyers player rep who had the vote on the exec board? Do you think the Flyers voted no if your captain's going and skating? They want to come back and they want to play and they think they've got a shot. And I don't think – I've seen a lot of people who say it illegitimizes their run, and I don't think it does at all. I think it makes it even more legitimate because you're going to play through a tournament of 24 teams, and you're going to find a way to win possibly.
Yeah, I'm going to make a bold statement here. When the NHL season resumes and the playoffs begin, that is a win because I am confident and I am hopeful that the 2020 Stanley Cup will be awarded. When the NHL postseason kicks off, Claude Giroux is going to prove a lot of people wrong.
In terms of what?
In terms of everyone who has ever tweeted, trade the captain.
Oh, that he's not deserving of the captain.
Everybody.
Okay.
Every single person who has questioned Claude Giroux wearing that C, I think they're going to taste it when the season starts.
And I was just shaking my head for a second, not at you. I'm shaking my head at the fact that it's not a coincidence. No, but it's not a coincidence. I know people said it. It's not a coincidence, though, that the people who were actually in the room with him, there was a great interview. Sportsnet does the 31 Thoughts podcast.
I love 31 Thoughts. Yeah. And if you are a hockey – I suggest all our listeners listen to 31 Thoughts.
Well, and guess what? This week they had Nate Thompson on.
And he
brand new Flyer. He played 7 games with the Flyers. That's it. He's got 7 games in the thing. Turns around and instantly, without even being prompted about it, asks what Philly's like. And he goes, Claude Giroux and Sean Couturier are the leaders by example. And believe it or not, he didn't talk about Giroux near as much. He talked about Couturier more. Called Carter Hart a stud.
And I love to see it.
And it's like it took a guy 2 weeks to get in and go
for a while.
Right. It took him 2 weeks to come in and go. They're not just going to be good now. They're going to be good for a while because look at what they've got. The culture is right again.
Thank you, Ron.
Well, yes, thank you, Ron. But also, thank you, Chuck, for hiring a coach that changed the culture very quickly.
Absolutely.
Yes. It was very interesting. TSN also does a podcast style. It's like a radio show type thing. I'm sure you've seen
Overdrive.
Yes.
Okay.
And they did
the O-Dog.
And they did what would you vote for the regular season awards? Let's just pretend we're handing them out right now. Obviously you're going to a play. They didn't do Selke. They didn't do Selke. I was curious. I was waiting to see if it came up. They did Hart and they did Vezina and they did Calder and things like that. And they did the obvious ones.
Did they do the Jack Adams?
They did.
Is that what you're going for?
Now, here's the thing. The Jack Adams is interesting because 4 people were on it. It was the regular 3. They had one. Ray Ferraro was on the phone with them. So they had 4 people. And you got 4 different answers for the Jack Adams.
Really? Wait, let me guess. Yeah. Okay. So I assume someone said Alain Vigneault, which is why you brought it up.
Yes.
Who else we got? I don't think Sheldon Keefe got much love, although he might have been one of those names because it's TSN. Yeah, I'm going to hedge my bets and say Sheldon Keefe was mentioned.
He was not.
No? Okay. But would you really be surprised? Let's be honest.
No, I wouldn't. Now, here's the thing. You are right. A Canadian team was mentioned. You have the wrong Canadian team.
Oh, was it Vancouver?
No, it was not Vancouver either.
Okay. For the record, I think he should be in consideration because he's done fantastic things over there.
Vancouver's Travis Green.
Travis Green has done fantastic work.
I like him as a coach.
Yeah.
I do. I don't think he should be in the running for Jack Adams this year because of the fact, first of all, they didn't make the playoffs by the traditional format technically, but that's not the reason I'm saying it. I think there are a lot of other coaches who have proven why they're their value. Believe it, and they mentioned something very not curious at the end, but they mentioned something that's fair to say. They said, you could say Bruce Cassidy for Boston, you could say John Cooper for Tampa Bay, and you go, it's almost a downside to say you have such a great team, but you still have to coach the team.
Bruce Cassidy was my next guest, by the way.
He was not mentioned among the 4. He was not mentioned among the 4. But granted, let's just say they did Hart. The 3 who are on the show regularly gave one answer and said, "Oh, here's who I think would win." And Ferraro, who is a voter, gave a top 3.
Okay.
So think about that. Then after that, they didn't do top threes anymore. But I would be curious to see if I'm sure someone would sit there and say, "Hey, Bruce Cassidy is a top three." They did bring him up at the end. Nobody picked him as the winner, but they did bring him up, and they brought John Cooper up.
And they both deserve to be mentioned, honestly, because they've
surprisingly
just done
there. And I will tell you, and they brought up the other name they brought up that was not mentioned as one of their winners was Jared Bednar for Colorado.
I also
he was
honestly probably going to be my next guess.
Now I'm going to.
Who did they mention? Because I'm all my guesses are gone.
Okay, one said Dave Tippett with Edmonton.
Okay, you know what? That's a fantastic pick. Okay, you know what?
If I had thought
more about the Canadian team, I should have guessed Dave Tippett because
and the Dave Tippett argument was the same as the Alain Vigneault argument.
Yeah,
total culture change, total guidance, turned a whole team around in a year.
Well, and it's I don't know how often you listen to Steve Dangle's content, but on the podcast they talk about the Jack Adams and they call it the you were supposed to suck award. And it goes to the coach. It goes to the coach of the team that was supposed to suck and somehow made the playoffs. The year that the Taylor Hall carried the Devils to the playoffs, he got some talk for the Jack Adams. Every team that makes a run down the stretch and squeaks into the playoffs and blah blah blah. Oh, is he a Jack Adams candidate?
Yeah, I hear you there. Well, and then then for the last two that were given as potential winners, and look, we could do this for half the show possibly, and I'm going to try not to do that. So, John Tortorella for Columbus.
Okay. Yep.
And Mike Sullivan for Pittsburgh. And here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Mike Sullivan for Pittsburgh disputes that claim because that's not a you were supposed to suck. That was you were supposed to be good, and you overcame the injuries and didn't miss a beat. That's a little different.
And it's easy to say that when Sidney Crosby is hurt for 37 games or whatever he missed this year.
And Jake Gensel's out for half a year and all that stuff.
But if you look at – if I came to you before the season and said Sidney Crosby's going to miss 37 games, Jake Gensel's going to miss a bunch of time, blah, 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 A, B, C, Matt Murray sucks, blah, 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 blah. How are the Penguins going to do? You would say they're supposed to suck.
I would say that it takes them from top three in the division and puts them – barely on the bubble, probably out.
I said on this show that the Penguins were going to miss the playoffs this year, and I firmly believed it because they looked like a disaster. Mike Sullivan, to his credit, and I do not want to credit a Pittsburgh Penguins head coach. And by the way, I love going back and watching the Stadium series Wired because he looks real whiny and it's great. But I cannot take away from him the fact that this team was right up there with the Flyers and challenging for position and giving this team, the Flyers, a really, really good run for their money. The Flyers were just starting to create a little bit of separation because they were so hot before the break. But other than that, it's been tight all year. And
isn't it funny that among the grouping that we're just talking about, we're not talking at all about Todd Reardon for Washington and that I didn't mention Craig Berube for St. Louis?
And again, because they weren't supposed to suck. You're looking at your two defending Stanley Cup champions. I know Todd.
I agree. It's
the same team. You still have Backstrom. You still have Ovechkin. You still have Kuznetsov. You still have Holtby for now. You still have John Carlson had 50 points in the first 35 games or whatever.
Sure, exactly.
Whenever the season started, I could coach that team to 50 wins.
Possibly.
Honestly, if I let Ovi run the line changes, we can win 50 games, no problem. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is go, good job, boys.
And it's interesting because then you can take the other top playoff teams and at least go to the other side, go to the Western Conference. Dallas made a coaching change. Vegas made a coaching change. They're all up there, but they all make coaching changes mid-year. You're not going to give it to a guy who coached half the – it's possible, but it's not likely that you're going to nominate the guy who, in the middle. There's a lot – that's why –
Jared Bednar has such a case, though.
Bednar has a huge case.
Quick, without looking it up, who were their goaltenders this year?
Who were Colorado's goaltenders? Yeah. Varlamov was for a time. Then they had
I don't believe he was there this year. Didn't he sign in Long Island last summer?
Oh yeah. Hold on, he did. Francouz was.
So they had Francouz.
How about Francouz? And then they had oh my God,
did they still have Philip Grubauer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Grubauer missed a lot of time, and that's why Francouz took off the way he did, but
So-
Grubauer missed a lot of time.
Let me clarify. Career backup Philip Grubauer missed a bunch of time.
Yeah.
They had to go further down the depth chart, and this team is second in the West.
Fair. Let's put it this way. To me, look, we're a Flyers podcast. We've said this a bunch of times. I want to make a huge case for Elaine Vigneault on this.
Yes.
But do
Please
you know
do.
who? No, but well, I want to.
Yep.
You know who? No, do you know who the winner probably should be realistically? And this is where they were right. And this is where the argument, unfortunately, beats anything about a culture change or turnaround. It's John Tortorella, because Columbus lost Bobrovsky,
Yeah.
they lost Panarin, they lost
We're
Duchesne.
supposed to
They
suck.
had nothing. And then then look at their goalies. Korpisalo, who gets hurt, and Merzlikins, who comes in and out of nowhere. Exactly. Who
Yep.
are these guys? Nobody knew any of these guys, and they legitimately made the playoffs.
I would like to point out that if Elvis Merzlikins one day ends up in the NHL Hall of Fame, the first time he was ever pulled was against the Philadelphia Flyers, and I was in attendance. So you're welcome.
Look, the Flyers torched that team a couple times out of it. You know,
I
two
was at
games,
the- I
two
was at the
games
5-goal
close, and
comeback
then
game.
well, and I don't mean to say like that's not a. I don't mean to say torched in the sense that
Right.
they blew them out by any stretch. There was only one game where they did. They won 5-1 in a game where they realistically actually got outplayed more than they got outshot heavily.
Honestly, yeah.
And got lucky with a lot of their goals because they hit 3 skates in the game and it went in every single time. Like your luck is sky high in that game.
That's
But
one of those games where I got that feeling about this team. That's the kind of game that special teams win.
Now here's the interesting.
And I don't mean
You're-
special teams as in power play or penalty kill.
Are you you're pointing out the 5-goal comeback? Or
the
5-goal third, I mean?
comeback? Looking at a couple of different games here. The 5-goal comeback, the game where Kevin Hayes banks it in off the goalie, and then there's a weird deflection later. There's a couple of weird goals in that game.
Oh, it happened 3 or 4 times in that game. It was Hayes.
Yes.
It was Phil Myers scored a goal off a skate, and
That's
someone else
what I'm
did
saying.
too. I'm trying to remember who else it was. But
There's
someone
been a
else did
couple
too.
of games this season where the Flyers got every bounce possible.
Definitely.
And that's the kind of thing. This is going to sound pathetic, but I've been watching this team for 25 years. I don't know if I've ever seen a hockey game where they got every single bounce.
It doesn't seem to happen.
It does
that way.
not happen, and it happened at least twice this year. And that's the kind of thing. And you and I have been talking about special for a very long time around this team. That kind of thing is special.
Sure it is. And now here's why I was asking you which Columbus game you were referring to. Because
I don't even remember.
No. Because to talk about the one in October, a lot of people were still going to be skeptics about it. And then don't forget that after they won that game, they lost the next 2 in embarrassing fashion.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people tell me, or like I've heard it on the station, things like that, that the second game of the home and home in February is the one where they come back from down 3-1. Kevin Hayes scores in overtime. That's the game that made people go, buckle up. It's going to be a ride to the finish line. And it's right. Start believing in this team because they've got something. And that was only win number 2 or 3 of the 9-game winning streak they had right before everything went on pause. Last game was a loss to Boston. That was about it. But they won 9 of the previous 10 before everything was paused.
Because I'm a sappy fan who wants to believe really, really, really bad, I bought in a long time before that Columbus game. I bought in the second Carter Hart stopped Taylor Hall 5-on-3 in the home opener. Yeah, that's how quick I bought in. That's how quick. That game, that game is what prompted me to say that thing on the show where I said the Flyers are going to make the Eastern Conference Finals. And sitting here, May 23rd, when the conference finals would probably
should have been happening
played,
exactly. Yeah.
I firmly believe it. I don't know about you, but I am still confident with that prediction of mine.
I didn't believe it that early. I will tell you that.
No, of course not.
I mean, and don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say I'm like I definitely like to put some faith behind a team and all that stuff, But October was going to be too soon, and even parts of November weren't. There were little moments. I have to go back and look at the schedule really quick just to kind of see which ones, because there were several games that were little moments, and then there was a block that I said,
"This is it."
That's it, and it was way before. And I'll tell you right now, it was way before February.
Okay, so was it before that Western Conference road trip? Because if you remember,
no, it came after. Some of the moments came before, but it was after that I really said, okay, they're out of this thing.
Okay. I agree, because that stretch between that winter road trip and the All-Star break, They just played really good hockey.
Yeah, I mean,
for like
to
a
me,
month and a half.
There were 3 games in early November said something to me. It was the overtime win against Montreal and the 2 shootout wins against Toronto and Boston told me a lot.
The overtime win in Montreal, was that Provorov?
No, that's another one, though, that was a moment for me. I'm talking about the first one, the Couturier goal against Price. It leaks under his arm.
Right. Okay.
But it was kind of a fluke.
When I hear overtime against Montreal, all I can think about is Provorov. Because, by the way, I don't know if you looked on the NHL's YouTube channel, but they did their top 50 goals of the season so far.
Yep.
And that one was like in the top 10, and it was gorgeous.
Yep. Yeah, so that was one because to me that was like it's a very fluky goal, but it's kind of a fluky goal that you don't expect them to get. The Toronto game in a shootout, they won because they had lost in a shootout the week before. They held on at the end. They were killing a penalty late in overtime, and Toronto nearly scored. And they held on. They win in the shootout. They're not supposed to be good in shootouts, and they win, and it's okay. And then the next night they come out, take a 2-0 lead on Boston. You can see the wheels starting to fall off on that game just from pure fatigue level. You played 65 minutes in a shootout the night before. You're doing it again. Something could go wrong. And they win that one in a shootout.
Hey, wait, how'd they win that one?
No, that's not the same one.
Not that one?
I'm getting – you're touching on all my answers. I'm telling you. You're right there. Because the Provorov goal is – because the Provorov overtime goal is one. That's a moment that you sit there and go, wow, what a special goal, what a moment. Even the first Ranger game before that West Coast trip happens, the last game before the holiday break, there was just something about that game, the Kevin Hayes factor going against his former team. He scores what I think was a pretty incredible goal because it was a perfectly placed shot on Henrik Lundqvist that turns out to be the game winner. Right. Like, and actually then by my judgment, 2 pretty incredible goals because the second one was full determination, go to the net, make a move, beat your former goalie. How much better does it get? And then when they came back from the break and within about a week's time, you beat Washington, Boston, and St. Louis.
Who were all the best team in the league at the time the Flyers played them, because there was that insane stretch where you played, quote unquote, the best team in the league.
Sure. And there's
in 6 days or whatever, and I think they beat all.
Yeah. And there's the Marchand game for you.
There's the Marchand game. There you go.
There, I said it. There's the Marchand game.
Well, there it is.
But but nonetheless, I mean, that 2-game stretch, the Boston shootout win and then the overtime win against St. Louis on the road after losing a 3-1 lead, said it all to me. And that was it for me. After that, I was just anything else that went from there. And it's funny to me because I look back now and I say, they beat Washington the week before. And Kevin Hayes scored a shorthanded goal. They beat Washington the week before. And that ended the 6-game losing streak. And for whatever reason, that win felt great. Obviously, like it snapped this losing streak. Right. They lost to Tampa the next game, but it was only 1-0. Tampa was on a 10. But Tampa was on a winning streak. I think 9 at the time, so it went to 10. And nobody cared that they lost to a team that was on such a roll, even though they had just come off of a 6-game losing streak.
Because they played a great game, and
exactly
you got goalied. And a couple of times this year, the Flyers have gotten goalied because it happens.
Sure, but to me, the reason that's significant is because of the fact that in any other season, you lost 6 in a row, you win 1 against a big opponent, and it's great that you snap that losing streak, but you lose the next one, you go
start another skid.
Yep. Well, but okay, so in this spiral. But in the same light then, okay, so they lose to Tampa, and Tampa's really good, and Tampa was on a roll at the time, and you ran into the hot goalie, and you accepted a 1-0 defeat on a kind of fluky goal anyway. You beat Boston, you beat St. Louis, and the next night they lost to Montreal, who was really far out of the playoff picture. And again, nobody really freaked out because they had 2 really good wins that week. And all everybody said was, just got to beat LA. Beat LA over the weekend, and it's not a big deal anymore. And they did.
Yep. And then you shut out Pittsburgh before the All-Star break, and they went into the All-Star break riding hot. They had lost 6 straight games 3 weeks prior, but they still managed to go into the All-Star break running hot. And it's really been great to see this team. But I do want to ask you real quick. So, 2 years ago, you can sum up the Washington Capitals run with OV gets his cup.
Yeah.
Last year, you can sum it up as the Blues were in last place on January 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Knock on wood, if the Flyers do the thing, how do you describe the sentence or the season in one sentence?
Boy, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know how to really describe it completely because of the fact that, I mean, you almost feel like it's too soon for this team in a weird way. like, you feel like there's got to be still a little bit more adversity, and not to say like there. Obviously, if you're in the top 4 of this playoff structure,
Sorry, a pandemic's not adversity. I don't.
oh, the pandemic's
No.
adversity, but I mean, season by season in terms of you have a young goal. Like, do you want the 20? Like, let's just wait. One of the great discussions you guys had 2 weeks ago that I wrote down something on was this topic. You brought up Marc-Andre Fleury.
Okay.
And I was very intrigued by this because I thought, what a great debate topic.
I still don't know how I became the champion for that, but whatever. Here we are.
I know. And you argued, what was your argument, that he's a top 10 of all time?
I said of the last 25 years.
Okay, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Of the last 25 years, you're right. Of all time, it's debatable. But
the reason I said 25 years is because goaltending in 1978 is not the same as goaltending in 1998.
Sure.
It's just not.
So
you have to draw a line somewhere.
So I told you,
butterfly.
Sure. No, so I told you, I took some notes on this after listening to you guys from a couple weeks ago. So hear me out on it, and I'm reading it off. So since the day I was born in 1992, okay, the Stanley Cup has been awarded 27 times. Should have been 28, but screw the lockout, whatever. Okay. So 27 times. And a goalie has won the Conn Smythe Trophy just 7 times in that stretch, okay? Now, 2 times since 1992, not going back further, or anything like that. Twice it was Patrick Waugh, who I think we can all agree is one of the greatest of all time, right? That's fine. The other 5 goalies who have won the Conn Smythe Trophy since that time, in 29 years' time.
Wait, are we doing trivia, or are you going to talk about it?
No, I'm going to mention them all.
Oh, okay.
Mike Vernon.
Because I know one of them is J.S. Giguère.
He was next on my list. J.S. Giguère in a losing effort, by the way.
Losing effort. One of only 2 goalies in history to do that.
Yep. Cam Ward, Tim Thomas, and Jonathan Quick. That's it. Now, Marc-Andre Fleury has 3 Stanley Cup wins, and I'm taking Mike's senior side on this. He won 1 of them. Hold on. He gets credit for 3. Okay. I'm not denying that. He gets credit for 3. He won 1 of them because in 2016, he played 2 games, and then that was it. Matt Murray came in, and that was Matt Murray's year. In 2017, Murray was going to start game 1 of the playoffs, first game, and got hurt in warm-ups. Fleury came in and then won the next 2 series.
Yep.
Not denying that. Where was it? Oh, and I'm sorry, won 5 games to get them right away. And then they got to his 3-1 series lead in round 2. So he didn't win the first 2 rounds. He won 7 out of the 8 games to win the first 2 rounds, right?
Yep.
They blew the 3-1 lead, and it got to a game 7 against Washington. Pittsburgh won the game and moved to the Eastern Conference Finals. So Fleury won that game and got to 8. But he lost the previous 2. Okay. Then they lost 2 of 3 to Ottawa to start the Eastern Conference Finals. Fleury got pulled in game 3, and that was it. He was done. And Matt Murray started the rest of the playoffs. So more or less, Fleury won half of the games, but it just shows you how quickly he was on thin ice in the playoffs. Yes, he got them there, and then that quickly it was, we're going back to Murray because he's ready, he's healthy, and we need to get to the next round, and we're down 2-1 in the conference final. And in so many situations where Ottawa could have won that series, especially in that game 7, you needed Murray, and you needed Murray in the 5 games. I'm sorry, what was that? That was the year of the. That was the Nashville year. So that was 6 games. I'm sorry, but
off the top of your head, do you happen to have the scores of game 1 and 2 in that Ottawa series?
Game 1 was only 2-1 in overtime, I believe.
Game 1 they lost 2-1 in overtime. Game 2 they lost 1-0.
No, game 2 Pittsburgh won.
Game 2, I'm sorry, they won 1-0.
Okay, so yeah, he pitches a shutout.
So he allows 1 goal in regulation through the first 2 games.
Then got shelled in game 3, which was I think 5-1 or something like that.
And that's fine. And when a playoff series is that close and you're kind of expecting it to go long like you are in that series, I get not wanting to wait too long and pulling the trigger because you have a perfectly competent Matt Murray.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't get there without Marc-Andre Fleury, because I believe their next goalie, because you have to consider, like, if you don't have Marc-Andre Fleury, your next goalie is going to play, right?
Yeah.
Matt Murray is going to get hurt no matter what.
Their next goalie at the time was probably still Tristan Jarry.
It was a 26-year-old Mike Condon or
Oh yeah, okay.
or a 21-year-old Tristan Jarry with one game played in his NHL career.
Sure. Now, and granted,
do either of those goalies beat Washington?
Well, no, neither of them beats Washington. The reason I sit there, I also say Murray for a different reason too, because to me, if Murray was starting game one of the playoffs technically and just gets hurt in warmups, that's the only reason Fleury took the ice in that game. Otherwise,
sure.
Then Murray was the guy in the regular season that got you where you were too. So Fleury wasn't necessarily the go-to guy until Murray got hurt in the playoffs, and that's when it became time for him to be the guy. So now, don't get me wrong, he does his part, plays a backup role.
Fine. If you want to
I do want to point out that, ironically enough, we're sitting here trying to make a case that Matt Murray may be responsible for these 2 cups, and he's on the way out
next year. I know,
because they favor Jarry more.
He's a 24-year-old has been.
Bottom line, to me, Fleury is not a top 10 goalie of all time. He is a Hall of Famer by the numbers. Okay. By the end of this thing, I looked it up. He's going to be 5th all time, and he's currently 5th all time in wins, and he's 13th all time in games played. So longevity and being on 3 cup teams will get you a spot in the Stanley Cup final, or the spot in the Hall of Fame, no question about it. But there are far too many years where he did have poor statistics, either in the playoffs or over the regular season, to sit there and say he's an all-timer. I think, and the longevity hurts you in that case because you have too many seasons where you can pull it out. That's where
you have too many times to have a bad year, too many chances.
Like his career goals against average at the moment is .257. That's 55th all time and 1 point better than Ilya Bryzgalov, who is 56th.
And
is Bryzgalov even close to a Hall of Famer? No.
Right. And Marc-Andre Fleury's career basically spans, quote unquote, the modern era, the post-lockout, for all intents and purposes. So like in terms of modern era, when 20, 30 years from now, when we're talking about the modern era and we talk about the post 04-05 lockout, I think Marc-Andre Fleury will be kind of the first big name people mention as the kind of the first generation of goalies post lockout. I think it'll be him, Henrik Lundqvist, Carey Price.
And it's funny you say that because it's exactly the group I wrote down. Both Fleury and Murray don't have the longevity of being the go-to guy in the playoffs like Brodeur did, or Roy did, or Hasek did, or even Lundqvist for that matter, because Lundqvist was for so many years. So almost to me, Lundqvist goes down as the better goalie to a sense, because he had that franchise recognizability with the Rangers that Fleury didn't always have with Pittsburgh. He did for a while, and then
he was never the one, the top fiddle or even the second fiddle. He was always at least third on the popularity depth chart because he's never going to be in front of St. Gino.
Yeah, and that's true also.
I think his personality did get him in front of Gino occasionally.
Sometimes. I don't disagree with that.
His personality combined with Gino's personality.
Right.
I'd rather talk to Marc-Andre Fleury.
But at the end of the day, I mean, see, that's the thing. Go through some of those Ranger teams. Who's the first name you think of? It's Lundqvist. And who's the first name you think of when you hear Montreal? It's Carey Price. Yep. The star player is not there.
But that's not Marc-Andre Fleury's fault.
Oh, that's not – I'm not saying that at all.
He was still a number 1 overall pick, which how often does that happen these days? I believe he's still the last goalie to go number 1.
Yeah. And he definitely is. That's not a question.
He's the number 1 pick. He's super funny. Like, in terms of personality and drawing attention, there's really not much more else he could have done other than not been French, honestly. Sure. Because I think the accent is probably the only thing that kind of tamped him down.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things to think about here is that when it's not a question what goal you play when you face a team like it is when you play Montreal or play the Rangers for a while, or at least go back before this year when you play the Rangers.
Right.
It's going to be Lundqvist. It's going to be Price, and that's what you expect. And if you don't face that guy, it's a surprise.
You're stunned.
And for a while, that was Fleury too. It was if you didn't play Fleury, you were surprised you didn't play
thinking
Fleury.
Your lucky stars you got Chad Johnson or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Now, granted, the thing that kind of stands out to me is how much easier it was for Pittsburgh to say we can replace Fleury than the other teams have done. The Rangers haven't thought this until this year.
But now they sure do.
No, they do. But Fleury was already being semi-replaced in 15-16, so to speak.
Yeah, but he was already, 33 at that point?
He was, but Lundqvist is 37.
But what you're arguing is the fact that the Pittsburgh Penguins had more foresight than the New York Rangers did. That's all that, right? Because Fleury has gone over to Vegas and still put up great numbers. He hasn't fallen off.
Right.
So
and maybe it's a little bit of a harder argument with the Rangers or with Montreal because again, you've had generational goaltenders potentially, like they are great, all of them. maybe the better argument, like one of the things I wrote down is look at the Capitals. You know, for years it was Braden Holtby, and he wins a cup, and then all of a sudden he's a year removed from winning the cup, and here's Ilya
They're already talking about
Samsonov.
getting rid of him.
Well, but here's Ilya Samsonov, and he's splitting time.
Yep.
You know,
I don't know who the starter is when the
right. Who's going to start the games? Well, who's going to start the games? You
whoever shows up in better shape.
Quite possibly. Yep. But this is a guy who won a cup 2 years ago, and he's essentially already being phased out that quickly. You know,
Marc-Andre Fleury got phased out the year they won their first cup. Like,
yeah, kind
of.
That
happened to him 6 months before the cup started, like before that playoff series started.
You know, and here's the thing. I think the bottom line that I'm trying to make also is
right.
Goalies have a short shelf life.
Yeah.
You know, you can be a legendary goalie and not have the games played that you think, like, there's Hall of Famers. Ken Dryden got into the Hall of Fame and he played 397 career games.
Right, because they're only playing 40 or 50 games a year.
Right. Jerry Cheevers did with 418. You know, even Hasek only played 735, and Richter played.
And Hasek played 72 games.
Richter played a great number of games in his career. 666.
Ooh,
I'm not kidding.
He played for the wrong Metro team.
Yeah, I guess so. But regardless, like, I find, like, it's interesting that they can have that shelf life and still be considered one of the greatest. You know, and Fleury's going to be, like I said, Fleury's going to be 13th all time on that list. How do you sit there and say just your longevity alone doesn't make you a candidate?
Yeah, he has to be. And that's my point. And again, I don't know how I became the champion for Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah, I know. It's really weird.
But, okay, I did want to make a point that you mentioned about franchise recognizability.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that first year in Vegas.
Personality-wise, in Vegas, he had the best personality. And personality-wise,
it was him and Ryan Reeves. Until Jonathan Marchessault scored 35 goals or whatever it was, and then he developed a personality. Early on, it was just Reeves and Fleury.
Sure,
and then Fleury got hurt.
Vegas got lucky in this sense. I don't think in this sense, because I don't think that there's a lot of teams out there that can sit there and say, we put together a dominant first line immediately. And when Marchessault started scoring and Riley Smith was on the line and William Karlsson emerged as a new star, you got three guys that became instantly recognizable and talked about among the league, because not only were you the expansion team taking off, but you had three guys who realistically weren't superstars anywhere else. Now, like Smith and Marchessault a little bit, but Florida was not exactly the market to do it.
No, Riley Smith should have been a superstar, but the fact that he was in Florida, I think, really killed a lot of that.
Riley Smith should have been a superstar because for a time he was with Boston and he had a chance to be that, and instead he is – Boston hasn't made them like that kind of mistake ever, I don't think, like in recent memory.
They did trade away Tyler Seguin pretty early, and Joe
Sagan
Thornton
might be the one guy you can think of.
Joe Thornton, he was the captain, but still.
Yeah, but Thornton hasn't, done – like he's had a great career, but he hasn't reached that mark, and the rest of the team
did. Hamilton? Bruins missed on Dougie Hamilton?
The Bruins missed on Dougie Hamilton, but then you could sit there and say they got Dennis Seidenberg's best years, and,
I'm just saying.
There's all sorts of guys like I'm trying really hard to not – like what I'm trying to sit there and say is I don't want to sit there and call Riley Smith the Bruins Patrick Sharp, but – he turned out to have a pretty good career regardless. Like, that's all I'm saying. He had a good career, even though he didn't play in a top city like Boston.
And the big story, obviously, was William Karlsson going from, 6 goals to 42 or whatever.
William Karlsson was the surprise of that team.
And 42 Absolutely. Was like that between-the-legs filthy one with, 2 games left in the season, or, between his own legs, or whatever the call was. And it was fantastic.
Which by the way, Claude Giroux nearly tried to copy 3 days later or something like
fantastic.
That against Boston, so that was fun.
But the NHL's not a copycat league, guys. It's fine.
Can't you tell I've still fallen down the YouTube hole? I'm watching highlights from games 2 years ago, too.
Listen, highlights. I'm still watching full games on NHL.tv. But either way, I think there's one more thing that we did want to talk about before we got out of here.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of really good conversation, but we did want to talk about our poll because we're really excited to have hockey news again. And we're going to talk about this poll, but we definitely wanted to start out with the hockey news because we got a new format to talk about. And we got really into it. And I'm super excited that
And then we touched on 5 other topics in between because we actually were talking about real stuff from this. We were talking about stuff from real stuff from this year. Like the Jack Adams conversation was something we didn't even talk about pre-show.
No,
but it is relevant to this season, and we were talking about it. It's like, let's just go for it. It's all relevant to the possible return. And granted, to make one final note on the possible return, just don't get too excited just yet. it's a vote to say
Still a
move forward with the
proposition.
process. But I'll be more excited next week if you get more firm details, which is possible. And
I think likely. I think there's a chance by our next show we know where the hub cities will be.
I agree with that. I think by the time we do 2 weeks from now, you're going to know the hub cities. You're going to know
maybe a training camp date.
I don't know about that. I think you're going to know the timeline of training camp, 2 games. You're going to know the structure of the games. You're going to know where they're going to be played.
Okay.
And you might even know how they plan to, like I had seen things, 2 cities that are standing out so far that I keep hearing a lot about are Columbus and Vegas. And the reason is like someone even said,
space.
Well, Columbus has a major hotel 5 minutes away from the arena that has 500 something rooms in it. You don't think
beautiful.
You can house a lot, right? You don't think you can house a bunch of teams in there? And you're not worrying about anybody else right now.
5 minutes from Nationwide.
You're going to pull it off. Vegas has 4 major hotel casinos that are able to house that have room numbers of like the number of rooms that these places have are in the thousands.
Oh,
2,000.
yeah, and there's dozens of casinos.
You're going to find a place that you can and not
Vegas
even sit there
has plenty of space.
And not even sit there and say that they're going to house the teams in just that place. They're saying that becomes headquarters.
Yeah.
Hey, Columbus is where the East is going to play. So this hotel that has 500 something rooms is the headquarters, and we will put everybody else around it. And you're going to be right down near Nationwide Arena. And
right.
Vegas, it's the same thing. You're going to pick one of the major ones and go, this is where everybody operates from. Vegas probably has the best shot of hosting the final, given the fact that not only can you put 2 teams, but you can put the entire league operation there. You can say, put the league there, put everybody there that needs to be there to be part of something. And
let's face it, the NHL would like to make money, and turns out you can sports gamble in Vegas.
Well, you can sports gamble in a lot of places now, but
I know, but
it used to be just that. Yes,
I'm sure it's a non-zero factor.
But nonetheless,
let's put it this way: there are a certain number of former NHL players that are looking for an office job somewhere just so they can go to Vegas.
Sure, and look. I'm just trying to say, don't get too excited yet because I don't think you're going to know a date for a while.
No, that's
they don't want to speculate that. And the reason you're not going to know a date is because I don't think that in 2 weeks' time when we come back and do this, I don't think you're going to have a solution to how testing gets done the right way. And I don't think you're going to have a solution to how they necessarily guarantee player safety yet. They want to get it, they've said they want to get it to a point where, hey, a positive test or 2 doesn't derail the whole thing. And I think that takes a lot of game planning. It's necessary right now to do all of the other planning because if you don't, I don't think you're saving the season. I think you're going to wait too long. And if you need to have the plan in place so that if you don't start training camp until July, like I've heard is possible, which means that you're not starting games until late July, which means you're playing this rapid fire play-in round plus 4 rounds of the playoffs,
intense playoffs
in 2 months or so. Then how are you supposed to do that without having the game plan hashed out at the earliest possible moment? I think people see this moment, especially with a lot of places starting to try to feel like they can open back up. This is the time to start planning and getting yourself in position to have it again. Yeah. So they're doing the right thing by doing that. And I hope in 2 weeks they have more. Because one of the points I made also is players don't want to leave their families. To my understanding, that's going to be accommodated by the league. They're going to allow their families to just go with them. And that's the right call.
And you know what? If most schools have moved to virtual and your kids can learn on a laptop anywhere.
Well, I don't even think that matters because you're not asking anybody to move until June anyway. Or July, possibly.
Okay, but if you're there in September, it might be relevant.
Oh, yeah, it might be relevant in September. And I think that everybody's going to do it their own way, and I think it's not going to matter in that sense. I don't see – let's put it this way. I would even be for saying, you know what? The players have to go to these hub cities by themselves for the play-in round. And once we get 8 teams out of the picture on both sides, or like between the 2 sides, and you're back to 16, now you bring your families because now you're in it for more of a longer haul. It's a 5-game play-in round.
The problem with bringing families in later is it kind of resets the quarantine clock.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
So, I understand that, but like I would almost sit there and say that that's almost like a workaround. Well, and granted, you're right; it sort of resets the clock, but you also want to consider
you're
where
we're doing testing anyway.
Well, no, but you also want to consider where you're going to be in July as opposed to in May. I mean, in May that doesn't work at all.
Right.
In July, does it work possibly?
Right. Well, and you mentioned Vegas is looking like it's going to be one of the major cities here, and Vegas is getting its first live sports test next Saturday. The UFC plans on hosting its next event there in Las Vegas at their facility. And if the NHL is seriously looking at Vegas as an option,
yeah,
I'm sure they're going to be watching very, very closely.
Well, and look, credit to the NHL for making the one thing that they don't want to be is they don't want to take tests away from people who really need them.
Yes.
That's why they're holding on this already. Like, you don't want to come back as a sport and be the sport that comes back and takes testing away from the people who really need it.
Yeah.
You want to do it when it's, okay, we can get enough testing and we can make sure that everybody else in the world who really needs it, these frontline workers, have the right amount of testing. That's the right answer.
Definitely.
That's not greedy at all to me. We're willing to step aside for the right people who need the testing. But if we can get the testing too, to go back to business and finish this season, we want to do it. I'm at least you're not putting yourself ahead of the real essential people.
Totally.
And granted, one of the things I haven't mentioned the entire time we've been talking about this return is the border between Canada and the US is being closed for another month to non-essential. Obviously, to me, it sounds like an exception is coming for the league, because why would you be this far ahead and be this? Well, and why would you be talking like this and having this much confidence in working out issues and working out a plan if you weren't going to have an exception? Unless they were to tell us the date that you're coming back for training camp is July 1st.
I'd be willing to bet that there is at least a non-spoken agreement in place that
there might be. I mean,
that NHL players will not have a hard time getting from point A to point B. I think the border does eliminate Edmonton because that is one of the other big rumored cities as a host city. I've heard Edmonton, I've heard Toronto, I've heard some other things, but Edmonton has gained quite a bit of steam. And I think they can get an exemption, but as it sits right now, everyone crossing the border quarantines for 14 days.
Right. I mean, it depends. To me, it depends a lot on the date that you intend to start training camp. If your goal to me is July 1st, let's say, is to start a training camp, which sounds like a reasonable goal at this moment, given the fact that nobody's been allowed to do anything else otherwise.
Right.
If that's the goal, then to me, the border, if the border lockdown, if the border restriction is lifted on June 21st, like it's expected, I don't see any reason why you can't stick to that and still, factor Canada in if you're starting in July, everything. If your goal was, obviously it's a problem if your goal was let players start to train in small groups by mid-May or late May, and which we're already at, by the way, obviously.
Right.
And maybe by the early part of June, that means everybody's in bigger groups, and that means you're back to really training the way that you expect, and that means by the end, early July, you're playing games. I think that's starting to be phased out because you're just getting this format established now, and you're still working on a way to figure out how to make it all happen. So
I think
it's not going to be let's just wait. It's not going to be the first sport that comes back. I think baseball is probably the first one in line to come back, then basketball, and then
you also have to consider, if you're talking about players going over the border and the Canada situation and the quarantine. I think we're going to end up seeing all our sites in the same country, just because the NHL panicked pretty hard when the shutdown hit, and some guys went home and some guys didn't, and we didn't know if you were supposed to or not supposed to, and borders got closed and blah, blah, blah. And I think the NHL is nervous about that happening again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to have players stranded away from home, you want them all to be in the same country so you can just deal with one government and logistically work it out.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable.
It's not so much that Edmonton won't be ready by mid-July. It's that, what if they're unready mid-August? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Well,
what happens if we do get that second wave and we have to lock things down, and all of a sudden, even if the players are quarantined and they can maybe, quote unquote, maybe still play,
right?
If other things shut down beyond the NHL's control, and all of a sudden they can't get the two conferences merged, now what do we do? Right? If the Western Conference is in Edmonton and the Eastern Conference is in Columbus, what happens if you can't combine?
Right. I mean, to me, I thought the easiest solution to come back was if you didn't factor in the 2014 playoff before that was really firmly on the table and voted upon, was the top 16 make it like normal, and 8 from each are going to play in one particular city. And and like I said, you can probably even rotate it and say 4 teams play every other day.
Yeah, totally.
And do it that way and get to the final in a timely manner.
Couple of weeks.
And pretty much close to. And well, here's the thing too. One of the other keys to this is if you're going to put the entire Eastern Conference in one city and the Western Conference in another until the final, there's no gap between series. If everybody if everybody swept the first round,
you don't have to wait 3 days.
Then you're not waiting 3 days for someone else to figure out travel restrictions and all that stuff. You're going to keep going. You're going to motor through.
Yep. And and obviously if the East finishes, they'll wait for the West or whatever. But generally speaking, they can start the same day. You can easily have 2 Game 7s in the West and 2 Game 1s in the East on the same day.
Yeah, you're going to need at least 3 days minimum before you start the Stanley Cup final.
Once you
from when the conference finals end. Correct.
Because you got to get tests cleared. You got to blah, blah, blah. You got to go through all that again.
But there's no reason
down to one city.
Sure. But there's no reason why, as long as the East is in one place and the West is in one place, you finish the first round, you get a day off and you start the second round.
Yeah, totally.
And same thing with the conference finals. You get a day off, you start the conference finals, and you keep moving until because time is going to be of the essence here when it comes to, God forbid, something happens outside of the structure that this is in, where they're saying 1 or 2 tests won't shut it down. But God forbid the wave comes through and you have a problem. What are you going to do? You're going to run into a possibility where you can't award the cup. You got to move quickly.
Another nice thing is that every single time a team gets eliminated, your odds get better. You got less people there. Things get a little less crowded. Every time a team gets eliminated and that whole 200 people goes home, a little more space, and you're down a little.
Well, and one of the things I want to bring up, about the border that I mentioned on 97.3 when I did a spot this week was, think about the players who currently are living in Canada who need to get back here just to be able to play with their teams. And imagine if they weren't able to, and you fill the void. I believe that you could run the league right now with players that are already in the U.S. because the minor leagues were told, stay here until you find out what happens, and they obviously can't go home yet.
But there's a lot of big names.
Correct.
That are still in Europe.
Now, picture the Flyers and say you could start the playoffs tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, but you could start training tomorrow, and start the playoffs in 3-4 weeks.
A certain portion of this fan base would be thrilled if Robert Hagg couldn't get here.
Well, and call up Mark Friedman or Morgan Frost and say, "This is the guys who are here, and we can bring them in." But you're going to play without Claude Giroux and Carter Hart.
Yeah, no.
Do you want to do that?
Nope.
No team's going to want to do it. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I'm not 1,000% sure. But let's take the big Canadians who can't get back here and just assume that they're in Canada. So assume Sidney Crosby can't play for Pittsburgh, or Nathan McKinnon can't play for Colorado. And Giroux's one of them, obviously.
Now that is a tainted Stanley Cup.
Correct.
That's
different.
Is one that gets an asterisk on it.
Sure. I mean, and there's a difference because, I can pinpoint a number of Flyers who are nowhere in the country. James Van Riemsdyk's in Minnesota. Kevin Hayes is back in Boston.
Shane Gostisbehere still lives in Philly.
Shane Gostisbehere still living in Philly. Exactly. Yep. I mean, there's a lot of pieces in place. And I believe, to be honest, I don't know if the Flyers have a goalie outside of Alex Lyon right now, because Alex Lyon lives in the States. But did Brian Elliott go home to Canada, or is he in the area? I don't know. I
couldn't tell you.
Right.
You know what? It wouldn't surprise me if Brian Elliott just hunkered down. I know he has a wife and kids,
yeah, but that's the thing. Canada is home for him.
And I don't know. Right. I know Kevin Hayes is back in Boston, but Correct. He's in the States.
And I mean, Joel Farabee's in the area because he was going to be in the area one way or the other. I'm trying to think of anybody else off the top of my head. I think Matt Niskanen's from the States. I think Matt Niskanen went back to Minnesota too.
Question for you real quick.
Sure.
What was the injury timeline on Sam Morin?
Not good enough that he could play.
No. Okay. If it was 9 or 10 months, all of a sudden that becomes an interesting little.
Here's the interesting part. He is skating because, to my knowledge, even if the skate zone where they practice is shut down technically,
it is.
Well, no, it's shut down technically by virtue of everything else. I think that he is allowed to rehab there as a doctor order type
deal. Medical?
Because it's medical. He's rehabbing from an injury physically. I don't know what the case may be. Somehow or other, I know he's skating. I don't know where. I can't say I know specifically where, but he's skating. And I would imagine that if he's skating, he's doing and doing it under trainer guidelines and doctor guidelines with the team. He's doing it somewhere local. It would have to.
Right. It would have to be.
So my best guess would be the training facility. But that's the only reason I think that. Otherwise, no one else is training there. So I don't know.
Okay, I was just curious. It's one of those things where
but everybody else who was hurt, you're right.
Looking
everybody
at
else
long
who was
timeline injuries, right?
And but everybody else who was hurt,
and these guys who were around the league had missed a big chunks of time.
Sure. Well, the guys who come to mind for me are Gensel and anybody who was on Columbus. Realistically, pick a name.
I think Tarasenko getting to be 100% is a big deal for St. Louis. He had come back and played a game or two before the break.
That's another good one.
But there's no way he was 100%. And Vladimir Tarasenko missed a large portion of this season.
Yep.
And I'm sure he's going to feel like he got a
they're chomping at the bit to get him back, too.
I'm sure he feels like he's got a second chance at this season.
And they were doing well without him, but they're chomping at the bit to get him back.
Yeah, that team goes from very good to scary.
Sure. There's a lot of teams that were borderline that go from, borderline to watch out for this team in short order, too.
Totally. And that's one of those things when we talked earlier about this being possibly the most impressive Stanley Cup victory ever. And that's the kind of thing, because you're going to have competition like we have never, ever, ever seen.
Right. I think people are worried. I think what people are worried about when they say it's not going to be legitimate is that you're going to run into the rusty team.
That their team's not going to win, and they're going to be salty about it.
Well, I think they're going to say it's not. I think they're going to say it's not legitimate because of the fact that they think there's a rust factor involved. That again, there's people who are going to complain.
That only their team had to deal with, right?
But that is going to hurt their team from moving on, or that helps their team advance further because of whatever. I don't know if it matters one way or the other. Like, it's still a factor, and let's put it this way. What's the difference between rust factor from not having a lot of time to train and having a team that's beaten down that you didn't know was beaten down?
Right.
It's realistically kind of, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing. That's apples and oranges, but still.
I think competitively they balance each other out.
It's in the same fruit basket. I'll say that much. Like, it's in this.
You know what? Speaking of fruit baskets, we've had some people voting on our Twitter recently, and these people are fruit baskets. Because our polls, I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty disappointed with how our best NHL team of all time poll has gone.
I am too.
I just want to say, I'm not even really all that disappointed that the Final Four looks the way it is. I get it. I disagree with it, but I get it. It's the fact that no Flyers team has won by any less than a 95-5 majority when playing against a non-Flyers team. Like, if the fans really get together and think about it, and it's a close debate, I can see the 86-87 Flyers beat the 98-99 Stars. I disagree, but I understand where that comes from.
Okay, yeah.
But they don't beat them 97-3 or whatever they beat them.
Okay.
That's not
fair.
How that works.
So, look, I thought this was a great idea for a lot of reasons. First of all, I think that the thing that makes a podcast or radio show or even a written platform that's a roundtable style really good is, the ones that are the best are the ones that I want to know more about what you're discussing. So if we're going to discuss even down to the ones we've done before, best players, best games, whatever, I want to dive in head first and know as much as I can to make an educated decision on the bracket, right? So I don't want to just sit there and have knowledge of the team that I cover or the team I watch. I want to, all the time, I want to have my finger on the pulse of the whole league. That's why we've talked about Jack Adams nominees that are not Alain Vigneault, and we've talked about other players who may be in Canada who we don't want to see miss the playoffs, just like for Pittsburgh or for Colorado or anybody. I don't care who it is. And the same should go for the history to some extent. I'm not talking about knowing details about situations. Like, I don't expect someone who's not a Flyers fan to know the story behind how Eric Lindros became a Flyer and that trade and that whole deal, or the reason that he left later on. I don't expect you to know every detail about that. But you should know the best teams in the league, because chances are,
the teams
but you're going to be like me, and let's put it this way, you're going to be like me, and if the playoffs happen the way they are right now, if the Flyers make it to the second round, they win the first round, who they play against, and they lose in the second round, are you still going to watch the conference finals and the finals?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So you're going to know who the best team was, whether the Flyers are in it or not. So I had a lot of problems with I told you this before we started the show. We ran the first four matchups, and I picked the loser of the first four in my bracket.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're running into is the fact that not all Flyers fans are full-blown NHL fans.
Um,
And the problem that comes with that is the problems like, not knowing who that 98, 99 Stars team is. When you see things like the 96, 97 Flyers beating the 03, 04 Lightning. I know you didn't even have the 03, 04 Lightning there, but either way, the 96, 97 Flyers shouldn't have beat them.
Based on what I just told you, I didn't even have the 96, 97 Flyers there, period. I had the 72, 73 Canadians there.
Well, right. That's what I'm saying. But once you look at that matchup, once that matchup is on paper, there's no way.
Right. I mean, it's funny because we all said it after we put it out there, and I'll take some responsibility for it because I helped us form the bracket kind of in a finalized form.
Yeah.
And I was the one who slipped the 86, 87 Flyers because Mike Sr. said it before, and I don't disagree with this. They might be the best team that didn't win the cup. They might be the best runner-up of all time.
And I firmly believe that the Flyers should have had 2 representatives on this list. They should have had that 86, 87 team and one of the Broad Street Bullies teams, probably 74, 75, but, I could be swayed otherwise.
I didn't have a problem putting the Legion of Doom conference champions on there.
Yeah.
To an extent, I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have them making it, obviously.
Well, guess what?
Hold on. The one thing that I will say that we did that I feel is right to this point. I heard you guys 2 weeks ago, and someone immediately I saw the tweet too that argued, "Where's the 17-18 or the 18-19 Lightning that were like one of the best regular season teams on?" Do you notice? 32 teams, 27 winners, 5 runner-ups or 5 runners-up. That's it.
And that's about right.
It's nobody who didn't make a final made the list. And there's other teams that won championships that we could have argued had a case here.
Yeah.
And actually we did. Well, and not only that, but I think it's fair to disclose right away. If you won back-to-back cups, if you won whatever, we took out back-to-back cup winners, and we just kind of took either the best or the most memorable version of that team.
Yeah, and we did talk about this on the show last week when we pulled for things. But we should, if we were doing an actual study of what the actual single best team of all time is, there would have been 5 Oilers teams from the mid to late 80s.
And Detroit goes that way. And,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
The problem is that doesn't really serve any function. And how is someone who didn't watch either team play, and if they don't feel like doing a large amount of research, how are you going to differentiate between the 77 or the 87, 88 Oilers and the 86, 87 Oilers?
It was sure, exactly.
Come on. You can look at what trades they made, but you're not going to do that. And honestly, that's one of the things.
I just said I want to dive in, and I didn't even feel like doing that much work on it.
Exactly.
It's very similar, and we know who the main guys are, and they were the same in 83, 84 as they were in 86, 87, and 87, 88.
Right, because free agency didn't exist.
But not only that, but it's still Gretzky, it's still Messier, it's still Curry, it's still Fuhrer, it's still Coffey. It's there's no need to go there.
No, the team.
Because we're running out of time, so I want to keep it. I kind of just am going to shoot straight to the Final Four that was there.
Yeah, go for it.
And go past everything. And it's embarrassing. It's not even that it's embarrassing that the Flyers are represented to an extent. It's embarrassing that no team that 3 teams lower than 5 made this list.
Yep.
Or made it to this point.
And again, the fact that no team got more than 5% against a Flyers team.
Right. Look,
the 76, 77 Canadians deserve more than 5% of a vote against any team in the league. You can put them against any team in the history of the league, and they deserve more than 5% of the vote.
I filled one of these out from the beginning, like I did with the games one, and all
I'm
that
sure
stuff
it looks completely different.
And it might be, I don't want to call it cheating. It's not cheating, but it might be boring to say it. But my Final Four was number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4.
That is a little boring.
No, but let me tell you why. With the exception of number 5 and number 6, which were 2 teams that I vouched for, I will fully admit that because of the fact that I felt it was a little bit unfair.
Represent the history.
Well, I felt it was a little unfair to sit there and say we're going to put all these Montreal teams there and say a team with Maurice Richard and Henri Richard and all these, and Guy Lafleur and Jacques Plante and all those guys is not one of the greatest of all time. And same thing with the Red Wings.
That franchise.
And same thing with the Red Wings and the Gordie Howe area. If you're not putting a Gordie Howe, Alex Delvecchio, Sid Abel. I'm showing how much research I did on this. I did some research.
If you don't put them in, you're doing a disservice to yourself.
Sure. Did I advance them far? Not really. The 55-56 Montreal team, I got to my Elite Eight, and the Detroit team didn't make it past the Islanders, which was, again, the representative from the Islander dynasty of the 80s.
Yeah,
that's how I'll categorize it.
That 55-56 Canadiens team was always going to have a tough road because if the poll went how I would have filled it out, they would have run into the 01-02 Red Wings and had a real hard time getting through them.
Well, that's where I had it ending.
Right.
Yeah, let's just say I'll probably surprise some people with this. I actually picked the Blackhawks over the Avalanche in that portion.
Okay,
I moved the Blackhawks there, and then moved Montreal beyond that, and that's how I moved them because
my heart won that vote. That 09-10 Blackhawks team just I can't do it.
Okay, so want to hear something funny about that then? So my favorite player I think I've said this in the show before, my favorite player growing up was Mike Modano for the Dallas Stars.
Okay. Yeah, I think you have.
My heart would have picked the 98-99 Stars, but my head picked the 93-94 Rangers. And it lost, and I was okay with it because I'm like, that was more of a coin flip. That was a 16-17, and I went, totally. I don't know. All right, I'll take it,
Overall, I think we're pretty happy with the results in non-Flyers matchups. Maybe not thrilled about everything, but generally speaking, they're fine. I think our biggest issue is really the Flyers.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that the Flyers going against anybody beyond it, like
anybody. Right.
Now, granted, I think that I did push, like when it came down to it, I think I pushed the 86-87 Flyers past the Stars of the 90s because that one to me was closer. I had no problem doing that. And I think that I moved I'm trying to figure out who I moved beyond that. No, because I didn't move the 96-97 Flyers. And granted, the 74-75 Flyers win the first round matchup, no problem. That's a 10 against a 23, and I move them, no problem. As much as I'm going to hate to say it, the 91 Penguins beat the Broad Street Bullies. How do you beat Lemieux Yager?
Clark and Barber are not as good.
Right, but not as good as Yager or Lemieux.
And no one – I will take all the heat from any Flyers fan who wants to bring that down upon me. Mm-hmm. Look at Mario Lemieux's career. Okay, is our conversation done now? Like, that's the end of it. But
something that was interesting to me as I looked through it too, because we're trying to point out like star power said a lot to me in this. So like honestly, I know it's boring to say, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the final four for me. Here's the thing though. Am I leaving a Bobby Orr team out of this Final Four? Probably not. Am I leaving a Gretzky team out of this?
Nope.
Probably not. And when it came down to it, I moved the Detroit team from the 2000s over because it's an Yzerman, Shanahan. Fedorov was still on the team at that point, I believe, and even in 2002, Lidstrom. Like, how do you leave that many great players out of this?
Right.
76-77 Montreal, maybe the greatest team. Like, by the way, we've structured it because we we looked up, we did some research on what was considered. We used that to factor in and come up with a ranking system that didn't necessarily mean it was going to be number one at the end, but we wanted to see.
We thought they deserved the spot.
Yeah. Right. They don't have – I have to go – I'm going to go try and pull that up really quick and just jump to that team really quick because I want to make sure that I don't leave somebody off egregiously.
Yeah.
But I don't – like off the top of my head, outside of Larry Robinson, I don't have a name that jumps out to me.
Okay.
From that team. Or the defining – like I could make the argument that how do you sit there and put a Gretzky team in there out of that portion of the bracket and not put the Gordie Howe team in there?
Now, just for a little devil's advocate here, who's the star power on the 86-87 Flyers if you're not a Flyers fan? If you're looking at it from a National Hockey League perspective.
Believe it or not, I mean, Mark Howe's a little underrated by national.
And that's why I said it. And that's why I said it the way I did, because I know that Mark Howe deserves to be that.
Right. So do you know who I think the answer is? I think it's Hextall.
I think that's correct because he's the personality. Was that the year he chased Chelios, or was that later?
That was later, but they did that year. They did have a pregame brawl with Montreal.
Okay. Oh, right.
The story is they didn't let him on the ice. Mike Keenan held him in the locker room and said, "I can't lose you tonight.
We can't lose you. We need you."
Right. So I need you to
stay
in the playoffs.
Here.
Right. It was
that was the pregame playoff brawl. Correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it was a couple years down the line. It might have been '89 when he finally just got so fed up with everything with Montreal that he just chase down Chelios.
How wild is it? Chris Chelios played until like 2006 or whatever.
Right. Okay. So
2008.
So
he appeared on our bracket multiple times in that 2008 Detroit Red Wings team.
Yeah, Chris I know. That's crazy. So that 76-77.
He might appear on this list more than anybody else.
Yeah. So that 76-77 Montreal team still had Lafleur on it.
Okay.
which I didn't remember about. Jacques Lemaire was on that team. Serge Savard, Bob Gainey, Ken Dryden. Like, there's a lot of names on there.
Serge Savard.
I mean, but I don't know that. But league recognition.
I agree.
League wide, like Lafleur might have a little bit. Robinson, I think, has a case. Dryden was one of the best goalies in that era, but is there league-wide recognition like a Gretzky or a Lemieux or an Orr or even an Yzerman had league-wide recognition? Yzerman was well respected. It's part of why I love putting. We've done this in brackets past. 01-02 Detroit I had against 2000-2001 Colorado, and I would have loved for that to be the Elite Eight instead, because to put the Yzerman, Shanahan, Fedorov, Lidstrom, all those guys against a Forsberg, Sakic. Who else was on that team?
We got pretty close.
Foote.
We got 96-97 wins against 95-96 Avalanche. So we got pretty close. We got the early prototype of that team.
Yeah, we did.
That rivalry, right? We got the okay. Our bracket got the early portion of that rivalry. Your bracket got the late portion of that rivalry.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, look, I think it needed to be represented one way or the other, because both of those franchises were great.
That was the best rivalry in the NHL for that 5 or 6 years, for sure.
Well, and again, we did like we said, we didn't double up on teams. There were versions of those teams that didn't even make the final that got put on a list of top 50s because they were that good. They were just that good. It's incredible. So, I mean, I didn't have so obviously my bracket's busted. Yeah. But I think the only team I had was the 87 Oilers, which, spoiler alert for anybody who's going to vote in the Final Four, that's my pick for the best team of all time.
By the way, congratulations to the 74-75 Flyers for being named the best NHL team of all time. I already
even when they're not necessarily.
Congratulations to them for winning the award. I'm sure, I am positive the Broad Street Bullies are paying attention or desperately crossing their fingers and hoping to win.
Here's the thing. I just told you that I had them out against the 91 Pittsburgh team because they went against each other.
Right.
I don't disagree that it's a top 10 team in
history. Oh, that's fair.
To an extent, if among these groups, in terms, like, let's say it that way, like, if I'm doubling up on the Oilers or the Islanders or the Red Wings at any time or Boston at any time or Montreal at any time, then they're probably top 15, maybe even better, maybe top 20 only. Like, because there's so many versions of those teams you can double up. If you're
doubling up, you could argue that like 3 or 4 Red Wings teams.
Right. Then you're doubling up. Right. But if you're not doubling up, they're top 10. Like, I agree. If I have to pick this dynasty, the Broad Street Bullies fit in, they're in the top 10.
And you know what? You can let us know what you think. If you think the 74-75 Philadelphia Flyers are the greatest NHL team of all time, then you can vote for them on in our poll over at YWT Podcast on Twitter.
You'd be. I'm quickly jumping in and throwing Mike Senior into this. You'd be wrong, but you can say that.
You'd be wrong, but you can say it, and you can say it over on Twitter at YWT Podcast, or you can find us on Facebook to say it. We're also at You Would Think Podcast. If you search it, it'll pop right up. We post stuff all the time over there. We're also on Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, sportstalkphilly.com. And we are also on YouTube. And I want to push that because we do have our video version. And I got my mic set up, and I'm looking a little more,
He's looking more like my setup.
I feel a little more legit now. I got to get a better, get a better pop screen because I've been fixing it the whole show. But in the meantime,
if you've noticed, I completely did away with that after a while. I tried the other filter, and it's. I hope it's not doing too bad tonight, or whatever.
No, it's been
doing pretty good. I've been trying to do some things. I'm in a. I assume I'm going to say I'm in a bigger room than you are right now, or a bigger room than I'm used to.
A bigger room than you're used to. Maybe not a bigger room than I'm in. I'm actually in a pretty decent size.
Then I'm in a room that has it feels like a bit of an echo chamber sometimes, and I haven't loved the way I've sounded on some of the previous shows, and I've tried my best to correct it. So. And not to mention, my setup has now been enhanced by I've got my little setup like this, and I threw the jerseys over the back in the backdrop.
Yeah, you did that right before the show and bum rushed me, so I couldn't get mine up. I might have mine up for the next show.
Yeah, but
either way, you can check out the visuals over on YouTube. Search You Would Think Podcast. Again, we'll pop right up.
Speaking of the jerseys, 2 of our top 4 Flyers of all time based on the bracket, correct?
And somebody who made a little bit of a deep run in our bracket. We talked about that Legion of Doom team.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. And in addition to finding us everywhere, you can also find Kevin at Kevin_Durso at Flyer-Delphia. And then he's also over as part of the Sports Talk Philly team. So you can find him there. Yeah. And you can find him on the radio all the time at 97.3.
Not all the time, but more now recently than ever.
It certainly seems like you're about 10 minutes away from getting your own show.
Hey, no, I'm not 10 minutes away from getting my own show. I wish I was.
Well, you should be.
I will say this. I don't like to plug myself often.
Oh, please do.
No, but that being said, please follow me throughout the course of the week, because yesterday let's put it this way. I got a tip that Friday was going to be kind of a day for something. Saw the 2014 format being rolled out more significantly, literally minutes after that, and threw a text back and said, "This is what you're talking about?" Because all I got was the league is supposed to say something on Friday.
Yep.
And saw that later and went, "This is what you're talking about?" Okay. And I watched all day yesterday to try to find out, were we going to get an affirmative result to that vote? We did. And this week, I'm hoping over the course of the next few days, weeks, whatever it is, by the time we do the show again, that we actually have a firm answer.
I was about to say, this might be, I don't want to be too optimistic here. And if you're watching the YouTube version, you would think podcast on YouTube.
Yes.
You'll notice that I'm crossing my fingers. This might be the last show where we don't have a lot of this information that we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about. A lot of the questions that we brought up, a lot of the issues that we brought up might start having answers by our next show.
Yeah, and I hope that it's one
and
of the
I'm trying to temper expectations here.
Oh, I know.
And we're not going to be back in 2 weeks.
No, but I hope we're on the brink of doing the last show where we're still playing the bracket game.
And you know what I'm happy for? I'm ready to go back to every week. I'm
ready to go back to every week too. I mean,
I miss doing this show every week. And the second we think we have enough content to do every week, we're back every week because I'm in.
Yeah,
let's go.
Same here.
So
I've been dying for it. So,
and you know what? That's a fantastic way to go out.
Yep.
There's a chance that the next show is our last every other week show.
There's a
That's
chance.
a real possibility.
We're holding out hope for it. We're not going to do it until we feel ready to do it, but we have seen enough come out that we're ready to do it.
I am starting to get legitimately excited. We are starting to get legitimately close. The next show might be our last show with this kind of gap in between. Oh, and I'm vibrating with excitement. I cannot wait. And I cannot wait to see you guys again in 2 weeks. Kevin, before we get out of here, anything you want to say?
No, I think we got enough of it out already.
I think we definitely did. I think we talked about a lot.
Happy voting in the bracket, everyone, even though you might be wrong. And hopefully we don't have to do any more of these to talk about how wrong people are.
Yeah, and we are firmly beyond the stage of I don't want to lean on the scale because it's not going to matter.
I didn't lean on the scale anyway. I didn't have a scale to lean on.
Until then, make sure you're going and voting on our polls over at YWT Podcast. We have 3 left. We'll talk about the winner on our next show. And on that note, we're out of here. See you guys.